r/Reddit, what is a mildly disturbing fact? The farthest point on the planet you can be from civilization in any direction is a blip in the Pacific Ocean called Point Nemo. If you were stranded there, you'd be thousands of miles away from help, and it would be very unlikely you'd be seen or rescued, as cargo ship routes don't go near it. To put the distance into perspective, the closest people to you would be the crew on the ISS. For extra context, the word Nemo is Latin for no one. Finding Nemo just became a really sad, lonely movie. That sound you hear on cartoons when planes, or anything, goes into a dive was taken from a Nazi dive bomber as a form of psychological warfare, and it is likely that particular recording was the last thing someone heard. Research Ju-87 Stuka Jericho trumpets. In France, a pig was dressed in human clothes, tried in court and was sentenced to death for eating a child's face. In toddlers, their adult teeth are right underneath their eyes, he said mildly. Have you ever thought about how whales and dolphins die? When they get too old and weak to swim to the surface to breathe, they start sinking into the cold, dark depths of the ocean, and suffocate. When a whale dies and sinks, it's actually called whale fall, and it creates entire sea floor ecosystems. The circle of life. Just discovered a guy accidentally swallowed an AirPod and reported that it still worked after it exited his system. Literally read it on the post before this. Thanks to pregnancy, the average number of skeletons in a human body is greater than 1. Years ago I saw an episode of Monsters Inside Me where this guy was doing something outside and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for a millisecond, but it was enough for it to lay eggs. After they hatched, they started eating his eye from the inside, and he was starting to go blind until a doctor figured out what was wrong. Since then I get super paranoid whenever a fly goes anywhere near my face because of the fact that something like this can possibly happen to me. Ocular miosis. But it could be worse. Warning, don't read further if you're getting ready to sleep or something. Oral miosis is when a fly lays eggs in the ear canal and it gets maggots. Those maggots get hungry, so they start exploring and eating. Sometimes they find their way out. Sometimes they damage the eardrum. Sometimes they keep going and end up endlessly eating tunnels around in the brain. It's extremely rare in first world countries. Most of what we know about the stages of hypothermia came from Nazi human experiments. I thought they came from the Japanese army testing on US soldiers and Chinese civilians, and some received clemency in return for releasing their results. It's from both, really. Joseph Mengele did a bunch of experiments on hypothermia too, among other insane shit. The Japanese in Unit 731 were horrendous. If you read up, they would put people's arms, legs, etc. in water and then freeze them, waiting until they were solid. First-hand account says you knew they were solid when you tapped them, and it sounds like a wooden board. They would then break them off. If you read up on 731, it sounds worse than anything I have heard the Germans did, albeit on a lesser scale. I haven't completely read up on German experiments, but 731 was insane. Putting people in high-pressure chambers and upping it until they died. Burying them alive. Burning them alive, using flamethrowers. Using them as grenade targets to test grenades. The hypothermia, obviously. Cutting arms and legs off and waiting for them to die. Opening their heads up while they are conscious. Taking arms and legs off and putting them on opposite sides of the body. No anesthetic for any of this, obviously. Removing their stomachs, brains, livers, etc., and then adjusting the body, that is put intestine to digestive tract. I have probably forgotten a fair bit. They infected people with diseases, and raped them also. Hear this from a first-hand account. I just grabbed from Wikipedia, because I remembered reading it about a week ago. One of the former researchers I located told me that one day he had a human experiment scheduled, but there was still time to kill. So he and another unit member took the keys to the cells and opened one that housed a Chinese woman. One of the unit members raped her. The other member took the keys and opened another cell. There was a Chinese woman in there who had been used in a frostbite experiment. She had several fingers missing and her bones were black, with gangrene set in. He was about to rape her anyway. Then he saw that her sex organ was festering, with pus oozing to the surface. He gave up the idea, left and locked the door, then later went on to his experimental work. I have a Chinese friend in school, here in Australia, who said just a few years ago that his family doesn't buy any Japanese cars, only German, due to what the Japanese did to China, over 70 years ago. In other tests, subjects were deprived of food and water to determine the length of time until death, placed into high-pressure chambers until death, experimented upon to determine the relationship between temperature, burns, and human survival, placed into centrifuges and spun until death, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays, subjected to various chemical weapons inside gas chambers, injected with seawater, and burned or buried alive. 38. Some tests had no medical purpose at all with instead intent to administer excruciating pain, such as injecting horse urine into prisoners' kidneys. 27. Keep in mind this happened to Soviet, Mongolian, Korean, and other Allied powers as well, albeit at a lesser rate. Pretty much all the scientists got off scot-free, from the commander of the unit downwards. This comment is definitely in a wrong thread. I was here to read about mildly disturbing facts, not hair-raising terrifyingly revolting ones. But it was very informative, thank you. This is actually really disturbing, but cats actually have tiny barbs in their penis. These are removed in the neutering process. I read this in a book about cats in 7th grade. I'm still scarred. I'm not saying any more about this, sort of, but not really. Cat penis barbs are testosterone dependent, meaning if a cat has testosterone in their system, they will have barbs on their penis. Testosterone is made mostly in the testicles, and neutering involves removing the testicles. With testosterone out of the system, the barbs gradually disappear in a few weeks after neutering. They aren't physically removed by the surgeon. Was a surgery done in 25 seconds. It was done so fast that the surgeon cut off his assistant's fingers, who then died along with the patient, and the spectator died from shock, resulting in the only surgery with a 300% mortality rate. You'd think trying to do a surgery in 25 seconds would be a bad thing, but surprisingly this was actually one of the best surgeons in the world because he could perform surgeries so fast. They needed to be done fast back then because there was no anesthetic, so slow surgeries would generally be even worse. Your belly button is just your old mouth. If you were at all entertained, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. Here is a sweet pupper for your troubles.